I was very happy to see that Greta Thunberg arrived after her 15-day voyage across the Atlantic. I mean, it's not as if I didn't think she wouldn't arrive. It's more her arriving that strikes me very deep right here. And actually fills me with a lot of hope. Just as Malala's presence in the world, just as the students from Parkland. And yet, when I read my Facebook feed, I feel like I need to see a therapist. It's just one horror story after another. Maybe I should get rid of all my friends. But in any case, last year I was asked to give a talk at Sojuji Monastery, which is one of the 2 monasteries associated with the Soto sect. And the invitation came with a request that was very interesting, which was for me to present a teaching on hope. And parts of this have been published in our blog. But I have to say the invitation to talk about hope was like, you gotta be kidding. First of all, our world is unraveling before our very eyes. Second of all, hope is not a Buddhist thing. And you know, the nemesis, hope and fear. So that's the kind of depressing side of Buddhism. You can't play with fear and you can't play with hope. But I thought, you know, I'm not sure about that. And so I wrote a very long piece on hope and really let the question of what is hope sink into my practice. And also, not just into my practice, but I realized that I was experiencing futility. And not because I'm old, but because of so much stress in the world today. And that any sense of energy or optimism to actually meet the world that I had seemed to be draining out of me. And I was very interested in that process because that's not my nature. I'm not the kind of person to just sort of, I mean, I know how to surrender, particularly to the oral surgeon, so to speak, to really let go. But this was different. I needed to really understand how hope operated and why I experienced hopelessness. Has anybody else had any sort of flavor of futility? Maybe raise your hand. You know, just even a little dose of futility. It's like, wow. And yet there were things that I could look at and sort of think about that would cheer me up, but still I was really struggling with the sense of meaninglessness in a world that seemed so fraught. So I ran across an interview of the American novelist Barbara Kingsolver. I love her. And it began to kind of generate some feelings inside of me. And I want to read you this short piece. So what is it to be hopeful and not optimistic? The American novelist Barbara Kingsolver explains it this way. I've been thinking a lot lately about the difference between being optimistic and being hopeful. I would say that I'm a hopeful person, although not necessarily optimistic. Here's how I would describe it. The pessimist would say it's going to be a terrible winter. We're all going to die. The optimist would say, oh, it'll be all right. I don't think it'll be that bad. But the hopeful person would say, maybe someone will still be alive in February. So I'm going to put some potatoes in the root cellar just in case. And then she goes, hope is a mode of resistance. And I would like to suggest to all of us in this room and our kind viewers, since I guess we're live streaming it, then it'll be a dead stream, but nonetheless, that we consider hope as a form of resistance. Resistance in relation to the prevailing toxic winds in our society, including our global society. Then I went on to say in the paper, if we look at hope through the lens of Buddhism, we discover that wise hope is born of radical uncertainty, rooted in the unknown and the unknowable. How could we ever know what is really going to happen, after all? Wise hope requires that we open ourselves to what we do not know, what we cannot know, that we open ourselves to being surprised, perpetually surprised. And actually it was William Du Bois, who is a wonderful environmental writer who lives just down our watershed here and down the watershed where I live in the mountains. He was the one who pointed out surprise to me. In fact, wise hope appears through the spaciousness of radical uncertainty, and this is exactly the space where we can engage. It's when we discern courageously and at the same time realize we don't know what will happen that wise hope comes alive. In the midst of improbability and possibility is where the imperative to act rises up. Wise hope is not seeing things unrealistically, but rather seeing things as they are, including the truth of impermanence, as well as the truth of suffering, both its existence and the possibility of its transformation for better or for worse. And then I write, through another Buddhist lens, we can see that wise hope reflects the understanding that what we do matters. It really matters. How we speak to each other, what we do in relation to the world, in relation to the environment. Every time I see a plastic straw or I find one in a drink from, say, Starbucks, I have this kind of, ugh. What we do really makes a difference. Even though how and when it may matter, who and what it may impact are not things we can really know beforehand. So it was very therapeutic to write this long piece on hope. This is just a dab that I've shared right now. But it took a kind of leap forward when I read Norman Fisher's wonderful book called The World Could Be Otherwise. And the title implies something quite interesting. It implies that we see things in a fairly hopeless way. And Norman is exploring a very interesting cause and case. And that is, what is it to have the attitude of a bodhisattva? And why is it that bodhisattvas are beings who are manifest radical imagination? So in the book is a story, and I want to read the story because I heard Norman read it when we were sharing the stage in Los Angeles, and I was so struck by it. And I've wanted to share the story with all of you since reading Norman's book and also since I heard him read the story. And this is from Norman's book, The World Could Be Otherwise. And again, you know, I think in Buddhism, except probably in the Tibetan school, but I think we missed the boat, actually, in Buddhism in this regard. There's a sort of notion that we should perceive things exactly as they are. But this implies the uselessness of imagination. And Norman has done this beautiful job of, if you will, revaluing the process of imagination. And in thinking about it, I realized that we have been caught in a certain way in a collective imagination of disaster. And that collective imagination has paralyzed many of us. So I just want to turn the key in this little lock that has closed down imagination and its value in our lives. Turn it and open a door. So Norman writes, here's a story about how imagination changes the world, even in the worst possible circumstances. It involves the French surrealist poet, Robert Desnos. Desnos was Jewish. During World War II, he went underground to fight the resistance. He was captured and sent to the concentration camps. One day, along with many other men, Desnos is crowded onto the bed of one of the trucks that transports prisoners from the barracks. The men fully understand where they are going. The trucks always leave the barracks full and return empty. Their destination is the gas chambers and the ovens. No one in the truck speaks. The mood is resigned, stricken. Eyes lowered, faces grim. When the truck arrives, the prisoners slowly and silently descend as if in a dream. The guards, normally full of jokes and banter, fall silent, unable to avoid catching the prisoner's mood. But this almost religious silence is abruptly interrupted. One of the men in the line of prisoners suddenly, with great animation, jumps up, pivots, grabs the hand of the man behind him. Astonishingly, his nose almost touching the man's hand, his body coiled tight with energy, he begins to read the man's palm. "Oh, I'm so excited for you," he exclaims happily. You're going to have 3 children, a beautiful wife, wealth, so fantastic, so wonderful. His excitement is contagious. First one man, then another, in shock and bewilderment, thrusts out his hand. Each one receives the same sort of prediction: long life, children, wealth, exciting career, beautiful surroundings, peace, happiness, success, joy, unending. As Desnos reads poem after poem, the atmosphere of the moment, drop by drop at first, and then, as if in a sudden tidal wave, breaking all at once, completely transforms. The prisoners are smiling, laughing, clapping one another on the back, their burden lifted, their reality transformed. Even more astonishingly, the guards also are affected. Like the prisoners, They had been living a dark spell in which the marching of men to slaughter was a normal and acceptable everyday occurrence. But now, with this absurd and unprecedented event, this sudden and gratuitous evocation of an alternative reality, the spell is broken. The guards are disoriented, confused. The reality that they had been living a moment ago has been somehow suddenly cast into doubt, all but shattered. They are no longer sure what is real and what is not. Perhaps their better natures, long suppressed in an effort to conform to the Nazi madness that defined their world, long numb to the grief, the guilt, the horror, were stirred by Desnos's powerful commitment to his absurd, but perhaps not absurd, vision. Who knows? They are, in any case, so undone by the jolly scene in front of them that they no longer know what to do. They can't go through with the executions. So they march the prisoners back onto the truck bed and send them back to the barracks. Through this spontaneous exercise of imagination, precisely the sort of move Desnos constantly makes in his poetry, he and these men were saved from execution. Desnos survived the camps, but sadly did not survive the war. He died of typhus a few days after the liberation. I heard this story from poet Alan Bernheimer, a translator of Desnos, who got it from the writer Susan Griffin, who heard it from her friend Odette, herself a writer and a survivor of the Holocaust. When I first heard it, I was tremendously moved. But then I thought, is it true? Did it really happen? It sounds a bit too good to be true, writes Norman. I don't know Susan Griffin, but I contacted her to ask. She said she believed it. Odette, Susan wrote me, didn't witness the event, but had heard of it from people who said they had. For weeks, I carried the story in my heart like a Zen koan, wondering about it, turning it over and over in my mind. One day, I had a realization. Of course, the story is true. Definitely, absolutely true. One way or another, it happened. What do you think? Do you kind of get it? I mean, do you feel where I might be going with this? How incredibly important it is to not only exercise imagination out of the collective imagination of horror that is like a tsunami drowning hope within our time, but also Norman is writing about an attitude. And he calls it the Bodhisattva Attitude. And I just want to explore this a little bit, because imagination and the Bodhisattva Attitude, which is from Norman's perspective based in the paramitas, but the Bodhisattva Attitude begins literally with a mind of generosity. Not a mind that's caught in this sort of narrow view of potential outcomes or conditions that we're in, but a view that is fundamentally vast and spacious, that is actually filled with possibility. And this is really critical. I mean, we narrow our possibilities when we don't actualize this attitude of a bodhisattva, a mind that is fundamentally generous. Norman talks about this bodhisattva attitude, but this attitude being a reflection of our character, being a kind of a stance that we take, a point of view. It's our internal atmosphere. And I remember years ago receiving a wonderful teaching on rising mind and sinking mind. And you know, some of us are definitely in that kind of heavy sinking mind. And it is like a unidirectional gravitational surface. We kind of suck everybody else down into this space that is tight and without possibility. Norman quotes a wonderful koan. He says, someone asked Tang Dynasty Zen Master Baizhang why giving is the gateway to the Bodhisattva path. And Baizhang answered that it is because to practice giving is to practice letting go. Then the monk asked, what do you let go of? And Baizhang said, your narrow views. Letting go of your narrow views. You let go of the idea that things are small and tight, graspable and possessible. That is the mind of generosity. That is really pointing toward a bodhisattva attitude. My own teacher, Bernie Glassman, he had a bodhisattva attitude. And his own dedication to Tikkun Olam, the project of repairing the world and repairing our lives, repairing the brokenness, the internal brokenness and the external brokenness, which he did not see as separate. And he did not let brokenness stop him. He had the imagination to see first the truth of brokenness, but also that brokenness can be transformed. And we know this from complex adaptive systems. We know that systems that break down and have insight about the process of coming apart can rebuild themselves in a way that is characterized by greater strength, by a higher order of complexity and well-being. I loved my teacher. He left in November last year. In a way, he had let go of pretense. The year before, when I had visited him, I actually took a few videos of him speaking through the kind of fog of surgery and the fog of his stroke, and I realized he did not perceive himself as broken, but he perceived himself as repaired. Even though he had cancer, even though he had been stroked, he experienced himself indeed as repaired. Desnos, like Bernie, had the courage and imagination to see life as whole. And the Buddha also is an example of this. The Buddha had the courage to penetrate the truth of suffering and to see it and to not flee it, and then to imagine what liberation for all beings was like. On imagination, Stephen Batchelor writes, the primary imaginative act in the Buddhist tradition occurred when Gautama Buddha addressed the 5 ascetics in the deer park at Sarnath and set in motion the wheel of Dharma. It was here, rather than at the moment of awakening itself, that the Buddha expressed an original response to the dilemma he shared with others. His originality lay with the conception of the Four Noble Truths, with which we're so familiar, which sets the template for all subsequent Buddhist thought. It's really fascinating to think that Buddha's imagination awakened not so much at the moment of awakening, of deep perception, but to actually imagine the truth of suffering and the way out of suffering. To see it, to feel it, to let it bubble up through his own experience. And Jeff Thanisaro Bhikkhu wrote, what made Buddha special was that he never lowered his expectations. He never lowered his expectations. I would like to suggest that Tan Jeff has made an important observation there and invites us, do not lower your expectations. Elsewhere, Stephen Batchelor writes, the practice of Dharma is more truly akin to the practice of art. With the tools of ethics, meditation, and understanding, one works the clay of one's confined and anguished existence into a bodhisattva. That's our work. How do we cultivate this attitude of a bodhisattva? How do we actually allow ourselves to imagine a world, a life that is fully repaired? But typically, we seem to have this bias toward the negative. Have you noticed that? It's like almost every attempt at starting a kind of good news publication or good news TV or Thrive or whatever. No, we sort of feed on terror. We feed in a certain way on the suffering. There's a wonderful case in the Mumonkan case 10 that I love. A monk said to Sozan, I am Seize, solitary and destitute. Please give me alms. Well, Seize is us in our lesser angel manifestation. I am Seize, solitary and destitute. Please give me alms. Sozan, who's one of the founders of the Soto school, said, Venerable, say. And Seize said, yes, sir. And then Sozan says, you've already drunk 3 cups of the finest wine in China, and still you say that you have not moistened your lips. And I'm remembering in our precepts, we say, do not cultivate a mind of poverty in yourself or others. In the peacemaker precepts that we share with the people who practice here, do not cultivate a mind of poverty in yourself or in others. Very important. So I like what Aiken Roshi says. He says, you'll find the wine of fulfillment in the deep cellar. Right? You know, we have to go down deep. We have to go into the depths, not resist the depths, but let go of the depths. And at the same time, you need to go into the deep cellar with the attitude and imagination of a bodhisattva. You have to go into that deep cellar, but with the attitude and the imagination of a bodhisattva. Now, in this regard, it's interesting to look at karma, because karma is often characterized as some kind of fatalistic or deterministic outcome of what it means to, you know, be a kind of good person, and you get an auspicious rebirth, and you get lots of nice clothes and a good building and wonderful food and all that. But what we learn about karma is that it is not so much the hand that you're dealt, but it's how you play it. How do you play the hand you are dealt? I think often of Nelson Mandela in this regard. He was dealt a hard hand, and he spent a long time in Robben Island in prison, on Robben Island in prison. But he played that hand with a bodhisattva attitude. His life was a catastrophe, and yet he used that catastrophe. He went into the cellar. He was in the prison cell. And he used it to actually open up his own capacity for empathy and compassion. So we say in the Mahayana school, bodhisattvas seek difficult situations. Well, some of us don't have to look that hard, if you know what I mean. My first teacher used to say things like, good karma is bad karma. And bad karma is good karma. You know, these Zen people, they always have these funny little kinds of turn around, you know, turning things around. But I look at Mandela's life, or I look at the bullet that Malala took, that has made her a world figure, speaking on behalf of girls and their education. Bad karma can be really good karma. In this regard, then, I'd like to finish my talk. As usual, there's much more I want to say, but when I was thinking about this talk and also this journey that I've been on really for a year, exploring the issue of hope, how hope, wise hope, is based in not knowing. Therefore, all possibilities are present. And also, wise hope points toward meaning in our life. What are our lives about? And I say to those who choose to ordain as a priest in our school, that your ordination is that time where you are borne witness to by the community in the vow to be a servant to all beings. To all beings. So in this regard, I wanted to share vows to conclude this talk. These vows come from a piece called Cultivating Peace and Dismantling War. And I'm going to invite us to repeat these vows with me, if you will. I'll say some words in the vow, and if you don't mind repeating, I would appreciate it. As one who aspires to practice the way of non-harming, as one who aspires to practice the way of non-harming and compassion, on this day, I solemnly swear to hold all life as sacred. I solemnly swear to hold all life as sacred. I vow to cultivate peace. To greet all guests with compassion. To feed the hungry. Shelter the homeless. Heal the sick. Bring the young to safety. And rescue the old from indignity. I vow to work for communities of connection. In which all people can realize their full potential. And contribute to the common good. I vow to dismantle the workings of war. Both within myself and my society. In the tradition of Buddha, Gandhi, and King. I pledge nonviolent resistance to institutions and governments that destroy life. I will stand in solidarity with my sisters and brothers. Who refuse to pay taxes for weapons of war. And who are conscientious objectors. In realizing my own true nature. I vow to stand for peace. I vow to protect our earth from limitless greed. And to dispel ignorance. Spreading justice and mercy in every direction. Living these vows reflect the attitude of a bodhisattva. And they also reflect the imagination that arises from a view of liberation and not caught in futility, in the paralysis of futility. So my hope and aspiration as we proceed into life and the complexities of the world is to not cultivate a mind of poverty, but a mind and heart of possibility. May it be so. Thank you.
Creations are numberless,
So thank you for coming out tonight. And also, I just want to express my love and appreciation for Norman and Kathy Fisher, beloved and old friends who have taught here in this Zendo, and Roshi Burney, who just is stronger in my heart every single day. And in this regard, just thinking about Bernie, cherish your relationships. Seriously. Take nothing for granted. Maizumi Roshi said, appreciate your life. The good karma that we have to be able to assemble safely in this space. And also to turn our efforts toward the ending of suffering, not just our personal suffering, but the suffering in this world. We can do this. We can do this. If this 16-year-old girl who just came across the Atlantic can generate the vision and energy to uphold the importance of taking responsibility at this time for caring for our earth, we can do this. We can. Thank you.